Okay, so now we're going to talk about, where's my thingy? We're going to talk about picking providers and some of the information that is going to be critical for you in this journey, and really, really helpful information. We're going to talk about resources, agency and surrogate resources, clinic and donor and attorney resources. We're going to talk about budgeting in particular. Is everybody doing okay? I know it's been a long day. This is the part I was telling you about before to push through. Please stay with us because this is an amazing discussion. We're going to talk about cost-saving best practices, and finally, we're going to tell you a little bit more about our gay parenting assistance program, the specific benefits of it, eligibility, and the process for application. I also do want to speak about how we can possibly branch our program out here in Europe so that we can make it available to European intended fathers. So the first thing I want to talk about is research and the selection process. Here in the Netherlands, Meer de Gewenst, APGL, Open Fertility, and Men Having Babies are all organizations that have information for you. Men Having Babies I'm selfish, I'm the head of the organization, but I'll tell you, we have an incredible bank of information for you. If you go on our website, if you're in New York, we have monthly workshops. We have these sessions usually once every other month. There's peer support through our group. We have a Facebook page. We have the only real directory of service providers where you can actually go through, read their profiles, find their contact information. You can watch videos that have been taken. We try to tape as much as we can from our large presentations. So some of the breakout sessions, if you don't get a chance to see somebody's breakout session, here you can go to our video archives at menhavingbabies.org and you can look and see some of those video presentations. Our ratings table is probably one of the most unique things that we provide. It is unbiased information that comes from parents about their experience in this process, with the agency that they worked with the clinic that they worked with. Some of them provide, hey, make sure you ask this question. All of those things that when you're at the beginning of the journey, that's the place to go to look. There are scores also on that table, and Ron has done exhaustive work, which he's going to talk about in a second, about getting the price sort of structures from each of the organizations and working to create some kind of cost sheet so that you understand what you're going into. And finally, again, I'll mention our Facebook page because it's a really great network for you to be able to speak with other people. Are we currently calling it, is it still Living the New Normal? What is the Facebook page? MHB Surrogacy Forum on Facebook. Okay. Also on our website.
Oh, but they can join the group.
You can join the Men Having Babies Facebook group also. So we're getting into different specific areas as we see different needs that need to be filled. We also have a consultation request form. So it really is, you can go to our website and it's like a one-stop shop. If you find an agency that you're interested, we have a blank form that you can fill out that we can send to them and they can contact you if you want to have a consultation with them. So you start with the agency, you can ask who they are, ask who they partner with, questions for them, and ask them for references. Make sure that you, a good agency will say, listen, we have a couple of clients that, if you want to talk to, you can get their specific experience about what it was like to work with us. Now, understanding the agencies are going to pick those clients, so chances are they're going to tell you good stories, but they will be honest with you. And if you have questions with them, then that's definitely the place to ask them. So I'm going to throw it over to Ron, and Ron is going to talk a little bit about picking a surrogacy agency.
So, as you said, typically people, just as when they start an adoption process, they would go to an agency. When it comes to surrogacy, many people would start by picking an agency that can help them. So the first thing that you might encounter or you want to pay attention to is that not all agencies provide the same set of services or the entire set of services that is out there potentially. So at the very least, the core value you're getting from an agency is to find you the gestational carrier, the surrogate. That is, obviously what they absolutely have to do. They are also, when you look into various agencies, you can see that some of them would charge you for screening an agent, each gestational carrier. Some of them will have some more of a general price structure. And I'll go into that more specifically. But if it is a limited service agency, if it's a service agency that provides relatively few services, they might itemize more of their services. So their price, their core, service fee is going to be lower, but then they might add services such as reviewing your insurance, such as even coordination might be priced separately. They might recommend a lawyer instead of having a lawyer in-house. When you have a full service, what is considered to be a full service agency, and obviously what the service it tells you may or may not be correct, but when we look at the general landscape out there, then they would certainly provide the full screening of all your potential surrogates, and you will only see the surrogate that they suggest that you would work with. They will provide all the coordination throughout the process, namely, they will not disappear once after, immediately after they provide the gestational carrier. They're going to stay there through the medical process and all through birth and after the birth. So that's one of the things you can get from a full service agency. They will typically even have an attorney in-house, or at the very least have an attorney that they work very closely with, that will be seamless to you, and it won't seem like you're working with two different entities. They all have at least social workers, sometimes psychological support in-house. Another component is escrow service or a trust fund. Sometime in the process, you will be required to put some money aside for the surrogate so that they can assure that money, that those expenses exist there in case you change your mind or lose your job or something like that. So they need to put the money in an escrow account. That could be a third-party provider. Full-service agencies are likely to have that in-house as well. As I mentioned, it is not always clear to say this is a full-service one, this is a limited service one, but those are the components to look at. Some of them would have, as I mentioned, insurance review as an extra service. Many of them would include that as what they do, which means that they will look at the medical insurance of the surrogate and make sure that it would work, because if a surrogate has health insurance, it doesn't mean that the health insurance will pay for pregnancy and delivery costs associated with surrogacy. Some insurance policies would pay for her to deliver her own baby, but if the baby is going to somebody else, they're going to ask not to pay for it. So an insurance review is something that an agency should do for you, tell you, whether or not the insurance is good. Sometimes it is extra, sometimes it is included. Some extras also may include what is called a guarantee program or a refund program. Agencies would say that, if you don't have a baby, they will give you back some of your costs. You may think what you think about it, but that exists out there. Some other thing to look at, some agencies, not a lot, have very close affiliations with maybe just even one clinic or one or two clinics. Other agencies work with a lot of different clinics. There are advantages or disadvantages to, obviously, to both approaches, and it's something that you may ask about and see what works for you best. And another, as I mentioned, another extra that some people would find useful is extra hand-holding. Sometimes, there are services out there of consultants or concierge services that could help you with additional, suggestions. They can help you, give you interpretation for every advice you get from the agency. If you're the kind of person who think you can benefit and enjoy that, then by all means. Needless to say, different options have different costs associated with them. It is not always true that a limited service agency would be less expensive than a full service agency. That's what you would expect, but at least be aware of these variables. George, oops, what happened? Well, please send and tell them I didn't like that. And okay, let's see if we can reopen that. Here we go. How long did it take me to recover?
So the good news about fertility clinics is that there are many of them, and there are many, many good ones. And usually because they want satisfied customers, this customer service is really their specialty. They do very well at that. But what's pertinent for us guys is that they have to be comfortable, used to dealing with gay couples during surrogacy, because there's not all that many of them that are good at it. Even if a clinic is excellent in terms of IVF results and dealing with patients, they might never have dealt with the gay dads during surrogacy and have dealt with a surrogate before. So it's important to ask them, obviously, about how big the staff is. Is this a factory of 50 doctors with 100 nurses? It does happen in some settings, but I think in the most of the clinic we deal with, they have a reasonable sized staff. They're approachable. Obviously, you want to make sure that they're reachable via phone, emails, they answer their email, especially for you coming from 6 hours ahead or 6 hours difference. It's important to be reached that way, I guess, via email. Egg donor list. In terms of cost saving, to have a clinic that has their own egg donor will save you some time and money. There are other ways of getting eggs. You can have a surrogate agency, a fertility clinic, and then a whole different entity, which is an egg donor agency dealing with the egg donation aspect. But in my experience, I'm not saying it's better, but it's actually more streamlined. If they have their own egg donor bank, like a lot of clinics I've already described, with profiles, some with interviews, some who are open to long-term contact, it's going to save you some time and money. Do they do egg freezing? I don't know any clinic that doesn't do egg freezing. Do they do in-house PGD, which is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, as we discussed before? Do they explain to you what the process is at the level that you want? Again, allowing one embryo from each biodad. I don't think any clinic would be uncomfortable with that in this day and age. This is certainly a reasonable request, as we discussed before with double embryo transfer. I did a study on this recently, and the second most common motivation for gay dads to transfer two embryos was to have genetic material from each of the dads, and that's a legitimate request. And do they have an in-house genetic counselor? Because genetic counseling is part of egg donor freezing and egg donor process, so that they screen to make sure they have a healthy genetic history. They don't carry any common genetic disease that we normally screen for, so they do the in-house screening. That's important. Want to ask the clinic what the costs are. What does it include? Is that a set fee per transfer, or do they have what we call an unlimited transfer with a baby guarantee, which might upfront be more costly? But if you have multiple failed transfer, it doesn't break not only your heart, but your bank every time you fail a transfer, because these things are going to happen. You're welcome to ask me later. None of my two journeys were totally smooth. None of my two journeys were successful in the first time. And it's hard to deal with. Are they dealing with this well? The cost of diagnostic medications, is it all included? Because not only the clinic asks for a fee, a lab fee, the egg donor, but then sometimes they don't tell you that these medications cost thousands of euros. So make sure you're well informed with respect to that. Monitoring. One of the cost-saving measures is to have your surrogate, the clinic, the surrogacy clinic, the fertility clinic, all in the same area. I'm not saying the other way is not good, but if you have a surrogate who lives in a neighborhood where the IVF takes place, she can be monitored very close by. That saves yourself some dollars there. And if, say, your surrogate is from a different state and she's going to be monitored locally in her state, are they well set up for this? I won't get into details, but once you have your egg retrieval, and after egg transfer, your surrogate goes back to where she comes from, and she needs blood levels and frequent ultrasound every couple of days even, so very frequently until approximately week 10 or 12. So is this well set up to do this close to where she lives, and are they well set up to have a surrogate or an egg donor who's not from the area? Are they part of GPAP? We like to say that all the clinics and agencies are part of GPAP, who are open to give funds for you guys and discounts to you guys.
Well, go ahead, I'll go back. I missed a slide when I went back. You know what, let me go back for a minute and I'll come back. Sure. I don't think we did this one, did we? We didn't do the costs, yeah. I think as we recovered the PowerPoint, I skipped the slide, just because there are obviously cost components you want to talk about to the agencies as well. We didn't do this one, did we? So we did go through level of services, but and I mentioned briefly that one of the questions you want to ask a surrogacy agency, as opposed to a clinic, is whether they have an in-house psychological support or attorney. Otherwise, it's going to have to be factored in elsewhere. You want to ask them about size of staff and years of experience, how many gay dads they worked with, how many European they worked with. Those are all obvious questions you might want to ask any service provider. But in particular, when it comes to an agency, as I mentioned before, there are fees that are included and not included. So this is why we have in the handout, and I'll go back to it a little bit later, but in the handout, which I actually don't have the version of, we created at the back an Excel sheet. Now, that's the kind of thing that might make you decide that you actually may not want to have children. So don't let that discourage you too much. When you're ready, when you're in the process, go back to that Excel sheet. We have one sheet for agency costs, one sheet for clinic costs. The sheet for agency costs includes also the expenses related to the surrogate. The sheet for the clinic cost includes the components related to the egg donor. Those numbers come from the analysis we have done on their average numbers of the analysis we've done of cost sheets of different agencies and clinics. So what it could also serve is like a checklist that will allow you, when you finally speak to an agency or a clinic, ask them, what about this, what about that? And the reason is that not necessarily because they want to confuse you, but sometimes they don't mind confusing you, they may or may not include all the costs when they talk to you. So George mentioned the cost of monitoring a surrogate, the cost of monitoring the egg donor, because there are several weeks during which all these processes take place. The surrogate and the egg donor don't move close to where the agency is, where the clinic is. Those things may not be mentioned when you sit with the agency and the clinic for the first time talking about costs. They may give you some items. They're going to tell you travel, surrogate will have to travel. There'll be co-pays and deductibles, because that's another American invention for medical services. Even if you have insurance, you have to pay each time you go. I think that might be actually the case here too. Those things may or may not be factored in. So that's why we created those sheets, to allow you to be able to go through them and try to get a full assessment of some of the cost components, all of the cost components that are involved. So when you talk to them, to the agency, you go through this sheet with them. You want to know how much what's the typical surrogate compensation package. You see, if you only compare the agency fees of agencies, you're not going to get nearly an accurate picture of what your costs are going to be, or where is it going to likely to be more expensive. The truth is that, all the power to them, some agencies are much more generous, or they just have to be, otherwise they won't find another surrogates, than others. Some agencies recruit surrogates in different regions than others. So you want to see what the total package of compensation for the surrogate is. That will be one of the major cost components, more than an agency fee. You want to see what are the third-party costs. It's, one agency will not have the lawyer part of their fees, the other one will. That you want to know what the third-party providers are going to cost. As I mentioned before, very important to talk about insurance issues. So the insurance issue is not just for the surrogate, it's also for the newborn baby. And at the expert panel hour, we're going to allow the agencies, the American lawyers actually, to provide at least their opinion about what the best strategies are. But once your baby is born in the United States, let alone if those are babies, you will have a certain period of time until you reach your home country during which those babies require health care. If they're premature babies, the cost could run in the tens of $1,000s a day sometimes, definitely very, very high. You don't want to start the process before you know what is the strategy that this particular agency will suggest for you when the newborn is, when your baby is born. Now, there are probably no, or maybe if at all, very few private options you can buy, for international insurance of babies. Usually they have a 2-week waiting period. So, by that time, you really don't need it as much. So talk to the agencies, see what their strategy is about covering your baby. I mean, I think German couples might have some options from their home country, maybe some others. I'm not familiar with all of those, but that's something you want to find out with the agency when you talk to them for the first time. When we speak about questions you ask the agency, ask them how they match you with a surrogate. So not just the level of screening that they do for each surrogate. Some agencies would go through 10 surrogates before they can find one good surrogate. So you want to know how diligent they are in their screening process. And the reason you want to know that is that part of the success factors, what would ensure that you are successful, is not just how good the doctor is, not just how good the lab of the doctor is. A lot of people talk about the doctor, but they forget that there's a lab behind that do the fertilization and the freezing and the thawing. But you also want to know how motivated and committed are the surrogates and the egg donors. Because if a surrogate or an egg donor misses a shot, or late for this, or not, or carrying weight that she's not supposed to carry, all those would affect the outcome of your surrogacy journey. So the better screening that is done, the better, not only is it going to be, more pleasant for you, but it's also going to be more successful and fewer risks of things going wrong. The timing of the screening is also incredibly important, because some agencies would tell you, here's a list. We actually have a repository of surrogates. You choose. Whereas everybody else is going to say you have a waiting list. And then you realize that those surrogates are not screened yet. Those are the women that submitted a form, okay? And the form said all the right things. But they haven't yet looked at their medical records to see whether they had the miscarriages they're not supposed to have, or whatever else that you look at the medical records for. They haven't had a psychological evaluation. They haven't done any one of those things. What then happens? They haven't even asked them whether they're willing to work with a gay couple sometimes. What happens then is that you see the profile, you really like it, and then you maybe even talk to her, then she goes through the screening, and then it doesn't work out. On average, it could happen 10 times, because that's typically the ratio of how many agencies, how many surrogates are being overlooked by agencies. So ask them, when are they screening the surrogates, not just how well. We talked about insurance, and then current waiting time. So if there are screening surrogates before they show them to you, ask them how long is their queue. It could run anything from several weeks, which is really the least, to a year or more. Okay, and the reason some people are willing to wait for a year or more could sometimes be this trade-off that we spoke about in the morning, which is trade-off between cost and time. So some of the agencies that have more affordable packages would therefore have a longer waiting period. Last thing I wanted to mention is obligation to use an agency for the sibling journey. Some agencies would, if you ever want to come for what we call a sibling journey, namely you have a child and you want to bring, you have a brother or sister, a sibling for that child later on. Some agencies would require not only that if you want to have the same surrogate, some agencies would require that you go through them and that you pay the exact same fees or very similar fees for the second journey. Others would either let you do what you want, maybe you'll feel comfortable, and it is obviously a risky decision to do it without an agency the second time, or at the very least allow you to pick and choose what level of services you need the second time around. You might, if you're the kind of person, remember we spoke about vision, that thinks that you might want to have more than one child or go through this more than once, ask that question early on. So now we're going to, oops, why is that not working? Okay.
Yeah, I think to come back to the sibling journey, that's an important one. One of the ways to both be bio dads or genetic dads is like what my husband and I did, is that we were not comfortable with the risk of twins, so we fertilized half the eggs with my husband's sperm and half with mine. So we ended up with more than a dozen of eggs, and most of which we froze. We transfer one from one biodad first, and then a couple of years later, we used the frozen egg from the other partner to do a second journey. And that second journey, the sibling journey, is much cheaper. And like Ron said, you can establish that with your surrogacy agency first. So what are the conditions? If you plan to have two kids, what are the conditions? And your eggs are already created. Your embryos are already created, so you don't have to go through the donor process anymore. So I always say that our kids were conceived the same day, because they were, but born 3 years apart. Are they fraternal twins? No, seriously, they're not. But that's saved us a lot of money to do it in 2 journeys. Not cheap, but definitely cheaper than 2 journeys from scratch. So again, I will give a little more details about trying to find an egg donor. I think I mentioned most of it already. Again, to mention the proximity to clinic is a plus. That's one of the cost-saving measures you can have. Proven fertility. I think, as I mentioned, age is super important. Proven fertility is not that important. They used to only take egg donors that had a miscarriage or an abortion or a child before. Not so anymore. So we'll assume that most 19 and 20-year-olds who never got pregnant are fertile. And I think it's a reasonable assumption if they're young. But if they offer you an egg donor who's like in the early 30s, I would have a question mark. So the earlier, the better. And one thing that's going to help you, most likely to help us, is to have a proven donor. A donor who had successfully given to another couple before. And typically when she was given these medications, she produced 1.5 dozen of eggs. So that was good for us. What you want, I won't get into too much medical details, is not too many eggs. 30 eggs is too many, but not too little either. So a donor who's given, say, 18 eggs before is really ideal in terms of your chance of retrieving a successful number of eggs. And again, the selection process. One thing that I didn't mention earlier is ethnicity. If your partner is, say, African and you're Caucasian, that's going to be important in your parameters. Maybe you want to choose an African egg donor to use your sperm, or the other way around, but that might play a role. If your partner is like mine, brown eyes, not too tall, not too short, blue eyes and brown hair, it's going to be easier from the same ethnicity. That's a factor. There's egg donor clinics that specialize in Asian eggs, in Ashkenazi Jewish eggs, in African eggs. So if that's something that's important to you, you should explore that, because that might play an importance in your decision. Cost variables. Again, I think the SRM guidelines are not to compensate any more than $10,000, if I'm not mistaken. 8,000 for first time, or 10,000 for it's proven. We discussed shared versus unshared, travel and monitoring. Again, the egg donor will be monitored before she gives their eggs for drugs, medication. Is this included in the package? And the minimum egg guarantee, that's important, because if a clinic says, listen, I'm going to provide you 12 eggs, so if the first time your donor gives 6 eggs, and that happens, or 6 eggs of poor quality, they'll guarantee you another cycle at no cost. So you might want to discuss this in advance. Information and presentation, yes. This is, again, the decision you've made. Do you want a clip of your donor? Do you want a profile? Do you want completely anonymously? That's really up to you. And you have to choose a clinic which offers you the level of comfort that you're in. If they offer totally anonymous egg donors, if they offer donors that are willing to basically be part of your family for the long haul, if that's important to you, you should mention it first. I'll let Anthony discuss attorneys.
Okay, in selecting your attorney, if you're working with an agency, a lot of the work is going to be done for you because the attorney for the agency is going to be representing you in the surrogacy contract. You do want to make sure that the agency has an attorney on staff who is licensed and understands surrogacy law. The attorney for the surrogate has to be licensed in the state where the surrogate lives. She has to have independent representation that is knowledgeable about the law in the state, and they must be licensed in the state where the surrogate resides. Surrogacy agreement and parental establishment are often done, and certainly in your case are most likely going to be done by separate attorneys. Even in the United States, they'll have one attorney who will be handling the representation of the intended parents in the surrogacy agreement, another attorney who handles the representation of the surrogate mother, and a third attorney who will address the parental establishment issue, either in the intended parent's home state or home country, and they must be licensed in the state or in the country where the adoption or the parental establishment proceeding is happening. If there is a pre-birth order is a document which in most cases terminates the rights of the surrogate mother to the child. In some cases will declare the rights of the biological parent, and in a few cases will actually declare parentage for the non-biological parent. I believe in California they can do that. However, you need to make sure before you start on your journey what your home country requires. I know in the Netherlands, you have to have a birth certificate, you have to have a pre-birth order which declares the parentage of the biological father, but the birth certificate has to have the surrogate mother's name on it. Once you've gone through the adoption process in the Netherlands, then the birth certificate will be, or then at that point, the parental rights will be established for the non-biological parent. The person who is establishing your parental rights for the non-biological parent, they have to be well-versed in surrogacy law, and they have to be from the country and well-versed in the laws of the specific country where you're going to be establishing those rights. And the last thing that I want to mention is the establishment of the parental rights is often a different procedure than the establishment of citizenship for your child. So you may also have to consult with an immigration attorney if the attorney you're going to establish the parental rights of the non-biological father cannot do that on their own. So just keep in mind that there are two separate issues of establishing the rights of the biological father and establishing the citizenship of your child. Okay? So I think we're going to move on to the next section. Ron is going to discuss some of the costs and best cost-saving practices.
I'm actually going to skip this slide, not just because we don't have all that much time, because this is just a summary of a lot of things that we already mentioned in other parts of the conversation. Your handouts even have this in more detail. What I want to focus on, and I mentioned already the Excel sheet at the end. What I want to focus on are some altogether, what are the cost-saving best practices that we have encountered over the years? So obviously, you know, you have some things that are in your control. We call them the choice factors. There are some aspects that are not, you don't have control over. Those are the circumstances that you're in, and then there's some chance involved. So, you know, picking agencies and clinics, et cetera, the health insurance options that they have, those are all things that if you're informed, you can make a choice about. That'll affect your costs. Egg sharing or even frozen eggs from a bank is a way to save costs. It is only suitable for you if your vision is such that it would allow, the number of eggs you'll receive will be enough. If you are interested in one child, if you're one sperm source, if you don't ever foresee yourself doing another journey, if you don't, if you have one child in the first one, then that might be okay for you. If you're coming back for another child, sometimes people would get a limited number of eggs from an egg bank or from egg sharing. If you're just starting your journey and if you want, a family of 2 children, that's not a good way to save costs. Numbers of embryos transferred. There are many different reasons why to transfer 1 embryo or 2 embryos, but they're also, that would also affect your costs in more than one way. I mean, you might end up transferring 1 embryo at a time, and it'll cost you a little more because you'll be having several transfers. But if you end up having twins, there's not just more compensation for the surrogate, typically about $5,000 additional that surrogates typically get if they are carrying twins. There might be additional costs such as bed rest and additional medical costs associated if she needs to, if her pregnancy becomes a little more complicated. So I'm not saying do this or do that, but that's something that's part of your choice, and that could affect your prices, the outcome. And number of sperm sources, there's a little more tests if you're 2 of you, but there could be other implications as well. Where you live, of course, how old you are, and HIV status are examples of your circumstances that could be that could affect your parenting overall parenting costs. It is possible to become a parent through surrogacy if you're HIV positive and non-symptomatic. We have 2 clips on our YouTube channel about panels we've done for people who, about this particular aspect of parenting for HIV positive men. It does have cost implications, so that's something that would have to be factored in. It's about $10,000 of additional cost typically. Now chance, if you need to try more than once, if you have twins, as I mentioned, if there's bed rest, those are all affecting your outcome as far as costs. We spoke about geographic location a lot. I want to mention just the differences here. The most important thing that you are realistically able to control is the proximity or the distance between the egg donor and the clinic. It is not unrealistic to try to have an egg donor that lives close to the clinic, and that will save you a lot of money. She needs more monitoring than the surrogate, and if she lives close to the clinic, it's usually already included in the cost of the IVF clinic to test her for blood and ultrasound in the weeks leading to the retrieval to see if her treatment is going according to plan. If she doesn't live there, it's usually several $1,000s additional cost. However, the surrogate's proximity to the clinic might not be as impactful, and it is also very difficult to achieve. Surrogates come from all over the United States. The likelihood that you'll be able to find a surrogate living close enough to a clinic that she doesn't need to, that she can be monitored by them. She could be living an hour and a half away by car, but she then would still not go an hour and a half to get an injection or to get a blood test. She will go to her local clinic, and you will still incur those additional costs. And then the surrogate's proximity to the intended parents. That is, once again, in your case, the least likely situation, but at least ask if she lives near a major airport, or ask the clinic if they can find you somebody that lives near a major airport. If you need to travel, to the United States, then take 2 other flights, until you get there. It's going to be time-consuming, it's going to be more expensive. If she lives near to New York, Chicago, Atlanta, one of those airports, obviously it's going to be a lot easier for you, especially as Europeans. And the last thing, as I mentioned, compensation levels. It's been mentioned before. That's something that we suggest. It'll be very tempting for you to say, you know, I'm going to go for an agency that has many more donors, even if they pay them more than what is the standard in the United States. We think it's unethical, and we think it's certainly not necessary. And then most places will have extra compensation for an experienced donor. That might not be a bad investment. An experienced donor typically would only get $1,000 or $2,000 more, but you know outcomes of previous, you know, it's what's called proven fertility or you know, proven donor. It could affect your success chances. However, when it comes to a surrogate, working with a surrogate that is experienced has absolutely no benefits as far as your success factors. It could be $5,000 more. And in fact, if anything, she might be less likely to be available if you ever want to have a sibling, a brother or sister in the future. So generally our advice is to not go for that. So, please.
Oh my God, who is that handsome family? That's my son, Nicholas, and my husband, Gary.
And all the pictures you saw today are all of parents in our network. None of them were downloaded from the internet.
There's no, what do they call it? Stock images. Okay, so I want to go, and Ron, please augment me as we talk about this, because the GPAP program, the Gay Parenting Assistance Program, I have fielded so many questions from journalists this weekend about our organization coming to make money off of you. And I have had to explain to them that our organization is a nonprofit organization. We take the money that we make from our events minus the operating costs, and we put it into the Gay Parenting Assistance Program. We try to get as much money and services out there as we possibly can. So this is the structure that we've created, and it took a long time, and it's been a really amazing process for us. Right now, what we are working to do is to make stage 1 available for European clients. Basically, the 2 tiers we call stage 1 the Journey Booster. Stage 1 gives you access to discounts. I did a monthly workshop on legal issues in New York, and I met a couple who got a stage 1 discount, and they said that they had saved $40,000 just from the discount that they received through stage 1. So it's a very significant stage. Once you apply for stage 1, you can choose from any one of 40 providers so far. We're continuing to try to add more people into the fold who have donated discounted services. One important thing to know about our program, at this point, it's not retroactive, which means that if you have spoken with an agency or a clinic and you've signed with them, and then you get a discount from us, it does not apply. It only applies when you have your discount certificate. You go to that agency, you say, are you a member of GPAP? They say yes, and you give them your discount. Then that's when the discount applies. So just understand that in the process when you're speaking with providers. We accept applications for stage 1 year-round. You can go online tonight and apply for stage 1 at menhavingbabies.org/assistance. Okay? And you will know within a very few days whether you have received the discounted services. So are we at a position now in Europe where, tell me where we are right now before I go on, because I don't want to...
You know what? Let's get back to that in a minute. Why don't you explain what stage 2
is,
and then I'll talk about both of them together.
All right, and then we're going to go into the Europe-specific stuff, because we're really working to build relationships with your organizations to help provide us with the structures we need to implement the program here. So after stage 1, there's stage 2. Stage 2 is what we call direct assistance. Excuse me, I'm not speaking into the mic. We actually, with stage 2, we give cash grants of up to $20,000, and we give free services that have been donated by the service providers. So at this stage, we really are making an incredible contribution to the ability of intended parents to have kids. There are specific providers that have made these donated services, and through a very complicated procedure on our part with the social worker, we match you with the people that you're going to be working with. It's so at that point, the element of your choice, that happens in stage 1 with the discounts. But if you do qualify for stage 2 for the direct assistance program, we will be matching you with the people providing services for you. Stage 2, like stage 1, is not retroactive. So if you have engaged, meaning not, you can have a consultation with an organization, but if you've signed a contract with them, then our assistance doesn't apply at that point. Stage 2, we take stage 2 applications. I believe we're taking them July 1st, and then they end on at the end of August. For that 2-month period, we do it once a year because we have a finite amount of money and services to work with. So we need to know exactly how many people we can help and with what services we can help them. Once stage 2 applications are taken in, we have a separate grant committee that reviews them. People who have helped us from the beginning to really, the stage 2 applications are much more detailed, I'll go into in a second. But we have a committee that's separate from the board of men having babies that actually reviews it and sort of puts it with the criteria.
Neither of us are on the committee.
Yes, neither of us are on the committee.
No need to buy us beer.
No, there is a need to buy us a beer. The budget, then ultimately the budget is approved by men having babies so that we can match those services and get them to you. So let me talk a little bit about program eligibility and the requirements. And again, I'm letting you know that Ron's going to come in the end and talk to you about where we are right now in making this available in Europe. For stage 1, applicants must be gay men or trans women. They must, single or joint applications are accepted. There is an income threshold, but the income threshold is adjusted by the region you live in and by your age. So for instance, where an $80,000 income threshold for an individual and a $100,000 income threshold for a couple will be very different in Paris than it will be in Detroit, or Chicago and New York, or another small town. So cost of living is adjusted into it, and earning capacity is adjusted into it. You must be between 25 years and 50 years. At least one partner in a couple must be 25 to 50 years old. You cannot already have children to be eligible for the GPAP program. If you are a couple, we ask that you've been together as a couple for a minimum of 2 years. There is a criminal background check involved because we need to make sure that the horror stories you hear about unregulated surrogacy, we are very, very mindful of that, and we have to do our due diligence to make sure that whoever receives from our program doesn't have a criminal background. Only for residents of right now it's only for residents of the United States, Canada, the UK, the Netherlands, and Israel. And the reason being, and Ron will go into this, is that we have developed relationships with organizations there that will help us facilitate the process of implementing the program. So if you go back to your home country, please, again, feel free to mention us. Feel free to give our information to your organization so that we can try to help get this throughout Europe. So let me tell you then about eligibility for, and this is the last thing that I'm going to speak about before we have the last introductions. And I thank the providers in the back. If the providers in the back want to, for the silver and bronze providers who are going to be introducing yourselves, come on up now if you don't mind. For program eligibility for stage 2, you have to pass stage 1. You have to be invited to apply for stage 2. We do take a health statement from you, and we run a credit report, which I know is different in each country. There are an assets and liability, basically a financial statement we have to take from you, because we need to know, and we base the information we get from that on the information we've received from the service providers about what their costs are. So we need to make sure that if we're giving you a service, that you have the cushion and you have the ability to carry through if something were to happen. There is a psychosocial interview. We have a social worker that's been working with us who calls and does an extensive interview with you and asks you about, your thoughts on parenting and your inspiration for applying for the program, and your preparedness. And this currently, stage 2, is only available for residents of the United States, Canada, and Israel, and more countries if possible, but we do need your support. So Ron's going to mention that briefly, and then we're going to go into introduce you to the remaining service providers.
So if you literally, tonight go to the website, these are the limitations that we just mentioned. We actually, part of the reason we came here is that we really wanted to expand GPAP to Europeans. One of the first requirements we have, even for the discount program, is that we need to have somebody at least explain to us, and somebody we can hold accountable, how to find income and how to verify income levels and criminal background checks. It's not that difficult, but once we are shown by a credible partner how to do that, and at the very least we're able to then add you to the list of countries that you can apply for stage 1, and you might need to provide certified translations of this form or that, but you will at least be able to do that. So from each one of these countries, and we had a meeting yesterday where we had representatives of I think 6 or 7 countries in the room, and we hope that in a fairly short amount of time we'll be able to set this up maybe in a month or 2, such that maybe even all the countries, or at least some of the countries represented here, will be able to submit for stage 1. But for stage 2, there's 2 things that happen. First of all, there's a cash component, a grant. And one of our, the way we handle those is we say we want to be able to go to a country and have a conference where also there are revenues from that conference, and those will go towards, the cash grants for those people. So the good news is that there will be now, revenues that can go for Europeans. But the other one, maybe as much as $60,000 or $70,000. But so in order for us to help 6 or 7 or even 8 European couples in the next year, we need to have more cooperation, ongoing cooperation from a European entity or even an individual entity in each country that helps us gather the income, not just the income, the asset records, the answer questions and stuff like that. The problem we understand is there's some legal limitations. So we are now trying to find some legal ways around that so that nobody is being guilty of mediating in surrogacy arrangements, whereas maybe in their country that is an offense. So if there's any lawyers in the house that think that they can, I know there are some, but if there are anybody that have creative ideas about that, we'll certainly put our brains together, our minds together, and try to come up with solutions for that, maybe even create an entity, something like MHB Europe, that will allow to do that. So until we set those, we have a few months to do that because it would anyway be something for 2016.